those things when we go out to bid for the actual project itself, for the actual work to be done, we'll quarry those people.
Mr. Bernhardt? All set? A couple of questions I had. On the feasibility cost estimate, there's some information on hazardous material removal and then additional notes on potential. So these quotes on disposal have already been identified as absolute?
No, absolutely not. So please don't take it as such. What they did is they said, worst case scenario is this. And then they went worst case scenario and then a low total. If they find it, here's what it would cost at the high end, here's what they would have to do at the low end. It doesn't mean that the estimates coming from other places, some places don't seem to have a lot, even any hazardous materials. Like there's been some schools that have been worked on that don't have any. Very, very few have actually come up with hazardous materials that they had to deal with during their projects. Whether we happen to be one of them or not, that's why we're doing the study before we even go out and do bids or even do drawings or anything like that. And again, if we don't have those, then you can knock off a lot of those costs right off the bottom.
I see now, they just didn't follow the columns for high and low. They put it in twice, okay. My other question, you mentioned because we have multiple projects, the potential schedule, will they select separate contractors for different roof projects? Or are they planning on having one contractor for the MAC and the high school roofs?
Here's the short and long of it, is they will see, once they know what the roof contains, whether they can go with one company or two companies. The roofs are slightly different in construction in both places, but basically last week they came in and drilled holes to get to the deck to see what's underneath the layers that are there. So until they get that information back, they won't be able to tell me. That's what I'm saying. I'm just giving a preliminary. Here's where we are. We should have a lot more information by the next school committee meeting in a couple of weeks.
We may be able to shorten up the time frame if there's multiple contractors.
We may, but regardless, just looking at the square footage, the different types of roof here at the high school, there's no way we can get it done without going into the fall. And really, it'll also be in who's available and how available they are, because like I said, the state has put out so many contracts and is still continuing to put more of them out. It's kind of crunching down on who's available and how many people they have to work with.
And the pool of contractors is limited to a list of pre-approved.
That's the issue.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you keeping us informed. Seeing no other questions and nothing else to add, we'll go on to the next item on the agenda, budget review of current year budget, fiscal year 11.
We're getting to that time of the year that we begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Right now, this report that you have runs through the end of April, meaning it's 10 out of 12 months, 8 out of the 10 months that we have students in school. So the amount of expenses that we have from here till the end of the year tend to be a little bit more narrow in terms of what we know we will need. For example, in terms of the regular ed salaries, we're looking at about 70% expended at this point. That means we may have another 10% that we could use towards the end of the year. At this time of the year, last year, we were about the same amount, so we may end up spending all of that. But in special ed, last year, we had spent about 70%, and right now we have only spent about 65%. So there's a 5% difference there. that we may see as an additional savings at the end of this year. Again, in terms of regular ed expenses, basically, supplies, materials, that kind of stuff, we're about 5% under the expenditures of last year. And even in the total special ed expenses, which include the big savings, which has been the special ed out-of-district placement, we're tracking at about 200 plus as an expense or as a savings. That 200 plus is what we're going to use, hopefully, to offset some of the increases in next year's budget, because we can prepay some of the special ed tuitions. Therefore, we will have enough to be able to pay things like the step and salary increases. So, as I went through all this,
If I can just ask, before we leave, that savings of the 200,000 on the expenses of special ed, 200,000 represents 2 or 3 cases of out-district placement typically. Is that...
For this year, it's been 2 full students and another couple of students who've changed places, left, moved out of the district, so we're no longer paying for them. One student is going to be hospitalized for non-educational reasons. Therefore, he won't be at the placement he was at. So for just about a month, we're not going to have to pay that. So things of that nature that sometimes happen. I mean, I have no control over them, but I'm not going to say I'm unhappy that we're going to see a few savings.
But the management of our special ed and the commitment that's been made in administrative team added to a few cases, but we didn't know where it was going to end up, is my point. So
the other thing that it has done is it has allowed us to create better programs and provide better services so that we can say to parents, hey, we have a better program. Parents who would usually be asking to send their kids out of district, we now have the ability to say to them, I believe we have something here that's appropriate and what your kid needs. So it's not an automatic, because if we didn't, I would be the first one saying, all right, where do you want to go? Let's look at somewhere else that the student can go.
So it may be short-sighted to see that savings and not reinvest it into special education areas so that we can continue to advance the services.
Well, in this environment of fiscal restraint, there is very few ways to put it aside rather than prepaying tuition and then releasing some funding in next year that then can be used to pay for the increases that we're going to see anyway. There is no mechanism other than to just give it back to the town and then have them put it into, if they want, into the stabilization fund, and then if we needed it, have to go get it from there. That's a little bit more work and a lot more difficult or uncertain is my concern. So, short and long is this. We are going to see the savings that will allow us next year to keep the level budget as presented. I was pretty certain that was going to happen. But in terms of the difference between expenditures last year and this year, I believe that we should have anywhere between $50,000 and another $100,000 saved from last year to this year in this year's budget. My concern with that is we are asking the town for $220,000